Today at the legendary Indianapolis Motor Speedway, we pay a special tribute to the running of the 75th 500-mile race on the most famous motorsports racetrack in the world. It's a Diamond Jubilee, and the celebration begins next here on the Superchargers. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of the Superchargers. I'm Jan Gabriel. Today, coming to you from the Indianapolis 500 Hall of Fame Museum on the grounds of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. It is here where they house the great racing cars of the past. On May 26, 1991, they celebrated an anniversary here, the 75th running of the Indianapolis 500. And today, we're going to take a look at 75 years of history of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. The Speedway was opened in 1911 for the first 500-mile race. They raced on bricks until the 1930s when they started to pave the bricks over with asphalt. And finally, in 1939, all but the main straightaway was covered in asphalt. In the 1960s, even the main straightaway was covered. Today, all that's left is 3 feet of brick at the start-finish line to commemorate the tradition of the old brickyard. Here at the Hall of Fame Museum, there are dozens and dozens of wonderful racing cars, and this happens to be one of my favorites. This is the Bull Seal Fast Special that won the Indianapolis 500 back in 1961. The driver was A.J. Foyt. It would be his first of 4 wins here at the Speedway. Also joining us on the broadcast today are some pretty knowledgeable people about this great racing facility. Waiting for us right now on the main straightaway of the Speedway is the voice of the 500, Paul Page.
The Indianapolis Motor Speedway has 250,000 permanent seats, making it the world's largest stadium. And on race day, more than twice that number of people come to watch the 500-mile race. The track itself is still 50 feet wide on the straightaways and 60 feet wide in the turns. Now, the development of the race car has obviously continued through the 75-year history of the Indianapolis 500. And there is one man with his photographic memory that knows more about the Indianapolis 500 than any other man alive. And he is Donald Davidson.
Well, thank you, Paul. Well, of course, speed has always been the big factor at Indianapolis. Speed and how to obtain it. There's been some glorious experiments over the years, and some of them worked and some of them not quite. But if you think aerodynamics is a new concept, take a look at the Marmon Wasps that Ray Haroon drove to victory in the very first 500 in 1911. There was no rule that said that you had to carry a riding mechanic, so Haroon designed a car without one. Not only did he save the weight of a second person, he reasoned that a narrow single-seater would cut through the air with greater ease. When the critics complained that he couldn't possibly know when somebody was coming up to pass him, he silenced them by rigging up this device, said to be the first rear-view mirror ever used on an automobile. More than 20 years after Haroon's initial win, streamlining took another step, and in 1932, the famed Art Sparks Gilmore Catfish made its debut. It ran well, but it didn't win. Lee Oldfield, who was in no way related to Barney Oldfield, although they often raced against each other, showed up in 1937 with this revolutionary creation based on the German Auto Union concept. It didn't qualify, but it did mark the first ever entry of a rear-engine car at the Speedway, and 2 years later a rear-engine car would qualify for the 500 for the first time. In 1931, Dave Evans drove this monster, unique in that its engine was a Cummins diesel. It completed the full 500 miles, finished 13th, and made not a single pit stop during its almost 6-hour journey. 3-time winner Louis Meyer drove this car in 1930, and it appears fairly straightforward, but let's take a look under the hood. And what we find is 2 straight-8 Miller engines bored out to 100 cubic inches each, mounted side by side, and geared onto a common crankshaft. It was louder than the devil, but it held together, and Louis finished 4th in the 1930 500. 1946, the first race after World War II, saw a mixed bag in the starting field, mostly of reworked pre-war cars, some of which were 10 years old and more. One of the new cars was driven by Paul Russo, and right away here, one senses that something is different. Remove the bodywork, and we find that it actually has 2 Offenhauser midget engines, one ahead of the driver powering the front wheels, and the other behind taking care of the rear, with one pedal operating both throttles. Amazingly enough, it qualified for the front row and stayed in the first 10 until it crashed after 17 laps. And finally in our mixed bag, here's the Pat Clancy Special, which showed up in 1948 and 49. Nothing untoward here, but hold on, what's this? Yes, it's an honest-to-goodness six-wheeler with four wheels in the back, all driving. Driver Billy DeVore stayed in for the whole race in 1948 and finished 12th. Well, you just don't see those kind of things being tried anymore. Of course, most people feel that technology has produced state-of-the-art racing cars. But who knows? Maybe one of these years, maybe somebody will show up with something really weird, and it just might work. Paul?
Thanks, Donald. You know, it's not only the cars that have changed drastically over the past 75 years, so have the attitudes here, especially the attitudes about women. With that story, here is the first lady announcer for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway's worldwide network, Sally Larvick.
Thanks, Paul. You know, 20 years ago, a woman couldn't even buy her way into the pit area, let alone be invited. Even drivers' wives were relegated to the grandstands, and definitely not the garages nor the pits. June Meyer, wife of three-time Indy winner Louis Meyer, remembers those good old days.
In 1939, Louis had an accident on the backstretch, and I ran into the gate there to get into the infield, into the garage area, and they opened the gate and left me in, and I went right on to the hospital. And they let me in there. That was the first experience I ever had with that. And when I came out, Mr. Ford was standing at the door, at the gate of the hospital, and he said, how was Louis? And I said he was fine. And I looked back, and there was a crowd of men and women there, drivers and their wives, were standing there wondering what had happened, because there was two other boys in the hospital at the time. And I was just dumbfounded to think that I was accepted in there at that time.
It wasn't until the 1970s that women were allowed into the pits. They were considered by many as bad luck. Betty Rutherford was one of the first drivers' wives allowed in the pits. Her husband Johnny won that year, 1974, and so much for bad luck. Today, women are as much a part of racing as anyone in the sport, including the drivers. It was in 1977 that Janet Guthrie opened the way for women to try and drive those 500 miles to victory. Desiree Wilson followed in 1982, although she did not qualify in the 3 years she appeared here. Those are the few women made popular by the limelight, but there are others who have spent years in the sport as scorers, team managers, fiberglass specialists, and even mechanics. Although there are still some who believe women should not be with their husbands in the pits, the only stands you'll find most of the wives on these days are the scoring stands.
Well, thank you, Sally. And on that note, we must mention the fact that the chairman of the board emeritus here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is also a woman. She is Mary Holman, and her portrait hangs here in the Hall of Fame Museum right alongside of her legendary husband, Tony Holman. It was he, along with Wilbur Shaw, that resurrected this great speedway right after World War II. And we come back here on the Superchargers. Paul Page is going to introduce us to some more legends of racing.
Welcome back to the Superchargers. I'm Paul Page as we continue our celebration of the 75th anniversary of the Indianapolis 500-mile race. You know, the names of the participants of the Indy 500 read like a who's who of American industry since the turn of the century. Names like Mormon, Haroon, Chevrolet, Rickenbacker, right on down through the generations to names like Penske. Now, in the old days, a winning driver would pull right up in this area at the end of the main straightaway at the end of the race. This is the old victory lane. Here he would receive a few $1,000s, a kiss from a beautiful woman, but perhaps most important of all, he would etch his name in the record books as a legend of the Indianapolis 500. Let's meet one of the greatest now, the first three-time winner of the Indianapolis 500-mile race, Louis Meyer.
Louis, in 1936, when you pulled into Victory Lane and had in fact become the first three-time winner of the 500, what did you think?
Well, I tell you what, my mechanic, after we got the checkered flag, my mechanic right away punched me on the shoulder and held these three fingers up and said 3 times, you know. And it was a thrill. I would say that when you're starting out like I did in 28, that is your biggest victory, is that first win. Right? Then when you're first three-time winner, that naturally is quite a thrill. And I imagine Foyt felt the same in his 4th-time win. The thing that they can't take away from Foyt, myself, or Tommy Milton, is the first time 4-time win or the first time 3-time win. Because that doesn't happen anymore. Somebody might win it 5 or 6 times, I don't know.
Louis, almost anyone who takes interest in Indianapolis racing knows you as a legend of the 500. What's it like to be a legend?
Well, it hasn't bothered me. I mean, I just like to be myself and, you know, get along with everybody, and that's about it.
Do the young ones now come to you for advice at all?
No, they don't. Actually, I shouldn't say that they do, because it's a new ball game. In fact, if they'd asked me, I wouldn't know what to tell them.
Louis Meyer, the first 3-time winner of the Indianapolis 500, and scored all 3 of his wins before World War II. Well, obviously, it is not easy to make it into victory lane at the Speedway. It sometimes is even harder than you might think.
You're absolutely right, Paul. It's very difficult to make it into victory lane here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But here's a car that did. This is the Ballinger Special. Now, this car was built in 30 days back in 1951, brought to the Speedway, and offered to Tony Bettenhausen Sr. to drive it. He turned it down, said it couldn't win the race. So Lee Wallard jumped in the car and won the race in record time. Right after the race, Wallard was injured in a sprint car accident. Tony Bettenhausen jumped in the car and went on to win 8 of 13 national championship events, and he would become the AAA champion of that year. Now, there's been a lot of devastation among drivers here at the Motor Speedway trying to get into victory lane. Many have led the race right up until the last few laps, when victory was snatched from them through a twist of fate. One such driver was Bill Vukovich, driving this sleek roadster back in 1952. This is his story. Vukovich would win the race in 1953 and 54, but 52 amounted to a late race defeat. He looked like a clear winner until his steering began to tighten. With only 9 laps to go, he suddenly slowed and brushed the outer retaining wall in the 3rd turn, out of the race. A crack had developed in the pivot pin, right inside here. And when it finally broke, Vukovich could no longer steer the car. The most celebrated defeat of all came in 1912. Ralph De Palma led 196 of the 200 laps that make up the 500 miles. And the only 4 laps that he didn't lead were the first 2 and the last 2. A snap connecting rod punched a hole in the crankcase, dumped all the oil onto the racetrack, and caused the engine to seize 1 1/4 laps from the finish. The determined De Palma and his riding mechanic then tried to push the car to the finish. But by the time they struggled around to complete 199 laps, another driver, Joe Dawson, had already won the race, and they were exhausted. They elected not to push another full lap. In the 1960s, there were actually 3 consecutive years in which the driver leading with just 10 laps remaining did not even finish. It began in 1966 when Jackie Stewart, driving in his first 500, appeared to be well on his way to defeating Graham Hill and Jim Clark, who, like him, were from the British Isles. Jackie slowed to stop with 9 laps to go, switching his engine off in anticipation that it was about to blow, with 0 oil pressure. First, he pushed his car for a few yards, and then he parked it and walked on in, amidst a wonderful reception for a fine drive, somewhat overshadowing the fact that Graham Hill had won the race. The following year, Parnelli Jones dominated the race with a controversial turbine-powered car and seemed on his way to victory, only to break down with a failed bearing in the rear end just 4 laps from the finish. Then, a huge accident developed on the main straightaway just as A.J. Foyt was coming around to finish. A.J. managed to pick his way through the debris and score his 3rd Indianapolis win in spectacular fashion, with Parnelli on the sidelines. In 1968, it happened again. Joe Leonard, in another turbine, was leading into the final laps. There was a late race caution to clear up an accident, and then, with 9 laps to go, out came the green flag. Leonard's car would not respond, and it would be Bobby Unser's race. For the 3rd year in a row, the leader, with 10 laps to go, became a non-finisher. There are a lot of heartbreaking stories here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but also a lot of heartwarming stories. The story of George Sally is one. He is an engineer who built this car, the Blonde Exhaust Special. He built it in 1957, took his last dime, all of his savings. He came here to the Speedway and tried to sell the car, but it was highly unusual. Nobody wanted the car. And what made it unusual was that George Sally took the upright engine and turned it over on its side, making it horizontal, thus lowering the center of the gravity of the car. Well, he couldn't get anybody to buy it, so he scraped together a few more pennies, a few more dollars, and got Sam Hanks, who had already retired from the Speedway, to drive the car. They went on to win in record time. A year later, Jimmy Bryan would drive the same car, and he too would win the race. But it was highly unusual. Now, something that you might not know is that there are some characteristics of the racetrack itself that are highly unusual. Here to tell us more, once again, is Paul Page.
There's something else unusual about the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Most people think of it as being perfectly symmetrical, a rounded rectangle. But it's not. Mario Andretti was driving me through this area one year and stopped right here to show me where the wall actually moves out a full foot. There's a little jog in the wall. And Andretti says, on a very fast qualification lap, you can tick the back end of the car over into this little jog and pick up a little more speed. Well, Mario Andretti can do that, and that's what's different between Andretti and Page. Now, you could keep a complete catalog on trivia, tidbits, and oddities of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And to add to that collection, here again is Sally Larvik.
The calm flowing waters of a gentle creek on a sultry summer day, in the woods perhaps, or maybe in a park. Hardly. What you're looking at is Little Eagle Creek, and it flows directly through the track here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. The creek flows above the track under the main grandstand on the straightaway, and below it under the first turn. That's why when it rains a lot at the track, it always takes a little longer for the first turn to dry out. That's because Little Eagle Creek is seeping through. Fishing, anyone? Also, if you hunt long enough on the grounds of the Speedway, you'll find treasures you never imagined in unexpected places, like here in this brush of weeds and tall grass. Just slabs of concrete? As you look closer, there's much more. There are handprints and footprints and names of celebrities who were the special guests of Wilbur Shaw and Tony Hallman. Guests like Jane Mansfield and her husband Mickey, Arlene Dahl, and others whose names you can barely read. Tributes in concrete to a time when Hollywood began to display its interest in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Finally, be careful what you call trash when you're walking around the Speedway. It might be a part of history, like this mound of bricks behind the backstretch. Remnants from an old construction site? Hardly. Take a respectful glance, if you will, at an era of Speedway history gone forever. These broken bits of bricks are what's left of millions that were used to construct the track here at the Speedway. The good bricks all gone, only the scraps remain, the remnants of an era long since gone but not forgotten. If they could talk, they would tell stories of winners and losers, of lives lived and lost in the fast lane at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Throughout most of the program today, we've been taking a look at the rich history of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Well, right now we're going to shift gears and take a look at more recent times. Now, the automobiles themselves have gone from low-tech machinery to high-tech, sophisticated, computerized supercars of the 1990s. Automobiles that are capable of average speeds of around 225 miles an hour. And if you think the cars are spectacular, wait until you see some of the recent finishes. In 1985, Danny Sullivan and Mario Andretti were racing side by side for the lead. On lap 120, Sullivan passed Andretti down on the apron. When he came back up on the racetrack, Sullivan's car did a complete 360-degree spin. Andretti avoided him and took over the lead. In replay, we can see that Sullivan was low on the racetrack. As he comes back up, the car becomes unstable and spins as Sullivan is hard on the brakes. When the smoke clears, he is facing forward and refires the engine. Sullivan then continues to chase Andretti and passes him again on lap 140 to go on and win the race. One of the most thrilling but dangerous finishes took place in 1989 when Emerson Fittipaldi and Al Unser Jr. were racing to the finish line. On lap 199, they touched wheels, sending Unser careening into the wall. While his car was totally destroyed, Unser himself walked away from the accident. And Fittipaldi went on to win his first Indianapolis 500 and collected a record $1 million for his victory. He would go on to become the national driving champion, posting 4 more IndyCar victories. On May 26, 1991, Rick Mears became the winner of the 75th 500-mile race at Indianapolis. It would be his fourth such victory, joining A.J. Foyt and Al Unser Sr. as the only four-time winners. He is seen here in 1988 winning his third Indy 500. He is the only man in the history of the 500 to capture 6 fast-time pole positions. And don't go away, we'll be right back with more here on the Superchargers. We're back with just enough time to thank the good folks here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Hall of Fame Museum for sharing their wonderful automobiles with us. My thanks too to Paul Page, the voice of the Indianapolis 500, to Sally Larvick, and to Donald Davidson. Now, we don't know what the Indianapolis 500 has in store for the future, but we'll tell you this, it will be spectacular. Until next time, I'm Jan Gabriel, hoping you'll join us again right here on the Superchargers. Bye for now.